basically he'd like to see if there's a way that he can figure out meander his way through all of these classes. One thing that's confusing is the idea of Yamaha pipe versus can. And he says here, not sure if this is too broad, but what I'd like to hear is a macro level overview of the different options in kart racing. Being a relatively new karter, there are always classes I'm hearing about that have funny names and don't mean anything to me. And if it's any consolation, Albert, some of us are around the sport 20 years or more kind of feel the same way about funny names, and they're very confusing. For example, Yamaha pipe. Is that something that is just in enduro racing? I think Yamaha can was another. For someone considering getting into the sport or someone looking to try out another class, for example, after the 206 entry point, what are my options? Why should I want to run one of these old classes I hear people are saying are dying? That's a fair point. Why would I want to switch to a laydown kart? The first thing that comes to mind is not being able to run it at a normal kart track. Valid point, but there's a lot of advantages to road racing too. So finally, he finishes off the post by saying, I know guys that have only done sprint karts and guys that have also always run enduro laydown karts because that's what Daddy did. That could be controversial, but anyway, maybe a conversation around the pros and cons of all these directions you can go with karting, but trying to stay at a high level without the class war drama. That's a heavy one to kick the show off with right there.
Yeah, so, that's a big one to start.
What do you think, Eric?
I think it's a really good question. I think it's something that I tried to address in the book that I wrote that has a section about that. But the unfortunate kind of in a nutshell answer is there's no magic bullet when it comes to one engine class, especially in the United States. Really anywhere you go in the world, there are different engines that are in vogue at different times for different reasons. Worldwide, that's kind of an issue. And I think that comes from kind of the consistent desire for people to try to reinvent the wheel. They want something that's faster, or they want something that's more reliable, or they want something that isn't as out of date. So it can get confusing. And it's one of the things that I see a lot of new
and all that stuff, and it just bonds like that, because I guess, if you take it to an extreme at the racetrack, you're sometimes dealing with life and death. You're at least dealing with that, that whole battle of trying to do better for yourself, improving your performance all the time, and, kick your friend's ass and then try and be friendly afterwards and, all that jazz.
Oh, absolutely. So, it's funny you mentioned that, and I heard what you guys were talking about just before I joined with entry-level classes and where to go. I'm out here at Pat's today. I drove out here to go for just a jog around the kart track, and I'm getting ready to go out, and a family just pulls in the gate, and it's a young family, mom and dad, and the son was probably 13 years old, and the girl was 9 or 10, and they are just from up the road, and they didn't know about the place, and they were curious, and man, I had such a great time. I stood and I must have talked to them for 45 minutes to about an hour, just explaining everything from the LO206, the 4-cycle options that you both were just talking about, and then the gist of it being, hey, karting is such a great family sport, and it did wonders for me and my personal relationships with friends and family. And so, yeah, James, you hit on it, and Eric, I know you've enjoyed the same out in Colorado. Kart racing has done so much for me in not only my career and my profession. I'm blessed to work in a job that I began in karting, but I have lifelong friends and people like Kurt Kissler and Rick Schmidt, who I mentioned. They are as important and as close to me as family, or they're like other dads. Guys like Kurt Kissler and Rick Schmidt and Chris Egger, the owner out here at Pat's Acres. Those are guys that, as a younger dude, really helped me out a lot. So to anyone watching this, if you're thinking about getting into karting just because you want to go fast and you have a need for speed, well, it's got other benefits. It can mentor you, and it can really turn your life around. So I always say karting's better than just going fast. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, there's a lot more dimensions to it than just that. I've been really lucky to experience it beyond just the driving at this point. As an official, and then on the administrative side, and then now on the side of building the community and really advocating. Tony, you touched on something that I love doing and I look forward to doing. I've found myself now to where I'll go to a racetrack and I'll see someone there that I've not seen before, or I'll see someone on kind of the sidelines just watching, and I'll go up and talk to them. I look forward to having those conversations because it's always interesting to hear people's responses. You learn so much about the sport or what you thought you knew about it just from talking to those other people. and from listening to their perspectives and trying to communicate what you love so much to someone else and get them interested and excited about it is really rewarding.
Exactly. I mean, and yeah, it's perfect, Eric. I mean, and that's what I'm so blessed with the ability that I have through my job as the guy on the microphone over the loudspeakers is every weekend, whether it's the 12 hours of Sebring or a kart race at IMI or whatever it is, I'm just trying to make some kid or some dad or some person in the stands, wherever we are, feel the way I feel about racing. Because if it weren't for karting and if it weren't for racing, I truly do not know what I would be doing with my life right now. And it's honestly, when I want to stop and get freaked out, I give that thought some serious time. And you hit on it. To go up and meet someone at a kart event, whether it's a new family or a young kid or a guy our age, it's so cool to have this knowledge base that we all have and to get to share it with someone and hopefully introduce them into something that you love. It's like trying to introduce someone to a drug, except the drug isn't terrible for them. So you hit on it perfectly, Eric. I could not agree with that sentiment more.
So switching gears a little bit, one thing, I grew up, Tony, you may remember this now. Obviously, he's still involved in racing. He's kind of one of the most well-known announcers, Rob Howden. Growing up in the pits, listening to him say, down the inside, book it, those sorts of things. How do you, as an announcer, develop that style, those Howdenisms, or in your case, Laporta-isms? How does that come about? Is that just natural, a kind of parlance of how you normally speak, or is that something that you work at? I've always been curious and always wanted to ask an announcer, but never got the chance to.
Well, that's a great question, Eric, and I appreciate it. And I'll just say this. I started announcing on literally, it was almost like a dare. It was like, hey, leave me alone, go up here and do this. And I went up and I was an 18-year-old kid. I was so big I was racing in Tag Masters, which is typically, as we know, reserved for 32 or 35-year-old drivers and up. But I was so big I had no advantage in senior or junior. So when I started announcing, I called races back then, and I try to call races today like how I would describe them to you if you and I were standing on the fence. And a lot of times, I'll be honest with you, I'm not the most politically correct announcer, and I'm not the guy that's the most polished, and I'm not the guy that's going to I'd like to think I paint a pretty good picture of what's happening if you can't see it. One of the greatest compliments I've ever gotten is when folks tell me, man, we were in the pits working on the karts, and we're 20, 30 feet away from the track, and we came jogging up to the fence to watch your race you were calling, and we'd be damned if we find out there wasn't 3 go-karts on track. And then the only other thing I can answer your question with is the greatest compliment I've ever been given is when someone tells me, hey, man, you announce a race just like you are as a person, which is real. I try not to butter anybody up at a racetrack. I try not to be a cheerleader for anybody. I try not to be a guy that wants you to know how great my buddy is at the track. I'm going to tell you what's going on that racetrack, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. And I've gotten screamed at, and I've gotten hollered at, and I've gotten knocked over after getting off the microphone for stuff I've said. And but
Knocked over.
Yeah, I've been.
That's not good.
I've had people disagree so badly with what I've said on the microphone at a karting event. They've put me on my back, and you just do it. And I try to call the kart race like I would explain it to you on the fence. And I don't pride myself on being the most proper sounding guy or being the most etiquette sounding guy. I just call it like how I talk and how I live. And I'm just a guy that I like fishing and I like shooting guns and I like driving fast. And that's how I talk about my racing. So it's just doing it. Anything you do, you develop a driving style by doing it and doing it and doing it. And you develop a talking and a commentary style by doing it and doing it and doing it. So, yeah, that's how I would answer that, I guess.
Have you done any announcing at all, Eric? Because you're a race director at least one of your local tracks, correct?
Yeah. So, well, with the Colorado Karting Tour last season, our normal race director, he had a couple things come up, so I was asked to step up and do it for about half the season, a little bit more. And in that role, you're not really in an announcer role. Of course, I did have to get up in front of racers and do the whole big bad race director speech, which over time I found my own kind of way of approaching that, both positives and negatives. There were times when I stepped over the line and times that I probably didn't say enough to get people's attention. But just like Tony mentioned, I mean, you learn by doing in that sort of role. I remember a couple times when I was racing when I was younger, in I think 2006. There was a guy on the West Coast. His name was Dave Williams, and he would
on a race how they'd like to. But I don't see the need in pretending that we're at a Formula One Grand Prix when we're at a kart race with 15 LO206s on track. We're at a kart race. And it is serious, and people spend money in it, and it is meant to be a serious affair. But why not have some fun and make people in the stands laugh and make people who are there maybe because someone they love is there and they don't particularly want to be there, but they're with someone who wants to be there. So why not try to make their day a little bit more enjoyable or teach them something through humor about the sport of karting? So that's how I try to come at every single race I announce, because there's a lot of people at these events who don't necessarily are not dying to be there, but they're there. So I try to make their day and their event a little bit more enjoyable.
So one really good question that we've gotten asked in the comments is by Wild Duck Racing. They're asking, as an announcer, obviously someone that is watching the track just as intently as many of the officials, I would imagine, to be able to capture all of the action. Are you ever put in a position where you're asked to make a call or officiate in addition to your announcing duties, or is that usually something that's kept very separate?
I will be honest with you guys, because this is a topic that I'm quite passionate about, because I have unfortunately seen very unholy relationships between series announcers in karting and the officiating the officials in that series. First off, to answer the question, have I ever been asked? Yes, very rarely. If it's an understaffed event with lack of officials, and almost always, I will say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. And it's a lesson that I learned years ago from Stan Bernarski, who's the operations director. He's kind of like the everything guy out at SCUSA right now. He was running the Rocky Mountain Pro Kart Challenge as our series administrator back probably 2013, 2012, somewhere around that time frame. And I'll never forget, we were at Miller Motorsports Park out in Tooele, Utah, and we were stuck with me. And
considering for the Team USA, I know that that was something that was batted around the KartPulse forums a lot, and it's more fun in that it's laid back, and it's, yes, you are adjusting the kart and you are adjusting the car, but it's a lot more in the hands of the driver. I love that aspect of it. Asphalt is very much that way. When you come back from racing dirt, you see so many drivers that do both become that much more successful on asphalt or pavement because they can run the car harder. They're more comfortable with the car not being as glued to the ground. Definitely, I know that I kind of look at the difference kind of almost a lot of great rock and roll musicians started as classical musicians, playing a piano or playing a violin.